Now, what I want to do is look at the concept of interview timings. This is something that a lot of clients and students I've spoken to don't really have a concept about, and it's about, well, what questions do I develop, how many do I develop. I want to talk about a little bit around the process of this, and before we actually get started with the development of the questions, we've got to talk about the actual interview process. All interviews should start with an introduction. Then you'll have the main questions that you would embark upon, and then finally there should be some summing up, and you would give the participants an opportunity of asking their own questions to you. Now, within the introduction phase, what you would need to do is also provide them with participant information, i.e. a sheet documenting what's going to happen, what they have to think about, and then an informed consent form, so a form which they will sign off saying that they're happy for you to use the data. Now, all of that could take between 10 and 15 minutes, so think about that, and it's usually trying to make the participant comfortable with the process, making sure they're happy with what's going on. So before we even start, that's a big chunk of time gone. Now, towards the end, or at the end of the process, you should provide these individuals with the opportunity to ask you any questions. That's after you've summed up exactly what has happened, and if there are any stages that will follow after that. Now, that could take between 5 and 10 minutes, potentially, depending on how many questions they have. So overall, we've got maybe somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes that's been consumed just with the administration of undertaking a semi-structured interview. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, the overall process should be somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half. In some exceptional situations, you may think about extending this to, let's say, 2 hours, but this should be rare because you've got to think about the time that the individuals have to stay with you. You also got to think about the time that it will take to do the transcriptions, which I'll come on to in a minute. Now, obviously, the longer the interview takes, you should think about the comfort of the participant. Have you got water for them to consume if required? Maybe are there biscuits or something that they can consume during the process? Obviously, are there toilet facilities in the immediate area that they can use if required? Because you're taking up their time, and it's valuable to them, and you want to make them feel as comfortable as possible. Now, sometimes you can mitigate some of these issues or procedures that you should follow. As an example, you could send the individual a copy of the participant information and the informed consent form for the time before you actually take part in the process, and then you start by introducing the topic or whatever you're going to do in the process, and then ask them if they have any questions about the participant information, and get the informed consent after that. One of the things that you should also do before you start the process is make sure all your equipment is tested. So I would recommend it's always recorded, at best with a camera, so a visual recording of the events that have taken place, but you can use just audio. Now, in some instances, I've done telephone interviews, and you'll want to record that. Now, I'm actually going to do a separate video again about telephone interviewing, because the equipment needed there needs to be slightly different, and I'll talk about some of the issues that I faced when I started out this process using standard equipment, and I'll show you the things that I use now. Okay, so that is the timings needed. Now, I talked about the transcribing process. As a rule of thumb, what you should consider is that for every hour you spend interviewing, you're going to spend between 3 and 4 hours transcribing because of the process of transcribing. Now, if you're a touch typist and you're used to this sort of thing, you might be much quicker. But it does take a lot of time to do transcribing. So say you've got 20 people, and you are focusing on 30 minutes worth of questioning. That's not including the introduction and the summary, because you don't need to transcribe that. So 30 minutes of direct questioning and answering. You're looking at spending about 40 hours transcribing. So that's the sort of timings that you should be aware of in this process. So that might again give you an idea of how many people you want to engage to do the interviews. So as a guide, I encourage my undergraduate students to set their semi-structured interviews so that they're probably going to ask about 30 minutes, or it'll probably last about 30 minutes. For my masters, I'll say something between 30 and 45. PhD DBA students, 45 minutes and over. And in the commercial sector, 45 minutes to 1.5 hours, depending on what you've got to do. Exceptional circumstances, if you're doing some sort of UX, user experience exercise, it could be a lot longer. If you're looking at in depth into a product or a service, it could be a lot longer. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the sort of times that you need to spend when you embark on a piece of research. So with that in mind, how many questions do you think you will need to undertake this interview? Okay. Let's say you had in your semi-structured interview list 10 questions. Each question will take somewhere between 1 and 3 minutes for you to ask and for the participant to relay their answer to you. So the cumulative process will be somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes, let's say 20. Now remember, you are embarking on a semi-structured interview process. This means that you should supplement each semi-structured question with a further 2 or 3 questions, which are unscripted, of course. Now, they could be something like, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't think of that before. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Or I don't really understand what you're saying there. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? These are the sort of things that you might ask. Or alternative, you could go completely off piste, as it were, and start a whole new set of questions because the participant has given you bits of information which is something that you hadn't considered before and you find really interesting and you want to get some more information about it. This process of semi-structured interviewing in the qualitative is all about getting a deeper understanding of the subject in question, so you really want to drill down as much as you can. In some of the commercial research projects I do, I might go beyond 2 additional questions, 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5. I just want to get an idea of what the individual means and how they feel about a perceived subject. The process is a skill, and it's something that you will learn as you do a lot more of it. So don't expect in the first instance to be an expert at it. However, there are individuals who do have this gift of the gab and are able to talk freely with the person. But bear in mind, one of the key things about the semi-structured interview process is being able to listen. Earlier on, I talked about making sure that your equipment is up to scratch, i.e. the recording devices work, because you do not sit there and take any notes. You listen attentively at what the person is saying, and then you think, oh, does that make any sense to you? Do I need to elaborate? Do I need to find out some more information? And that's where the additional questions come into play.